Virginia Giuffre, the longtime accuser of late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, is suing Prince Andrew in U.S. federal court. The civil lawsuit accuses Prince Andrew of touching her in an offensive and sexual manner without her consent, all while knowing she was a sex trafficking victim when she was just 17 years old.
Prince Andrew would like to put all these allegations, which he denies, behind him, but it does now appear that he'll have to face them one way or another. His career as a royal has already effectively been ended by Virginia Giuffre's claims, but her lawsuit raises the stakes considerably, seeking to put him on trial in the United States. Prince Andrew's legal team is working to have the whole case dismissed, calling it baseless and potentially unlawful. We're going to consider those legal challenges in a moment with our guests, including the former Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, who defended Jeffrey Epstein back in 2007, and we'll hear from Lisa Bloom, who represents a number of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged victims and a witness against Prince Andrew. And we'll hear from Russell Myers, the royal editor at the Daily Mirror, who's in touch with people close to Prince Andrew. But first, let's take a very close look at this lawsuit. The 15-page legal document filed last month by Virginia Giuffre's lawyers attempts to build a case against Prince Andrew by describing in detail his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and his one-time lover, Ghislaine Maxwell. During 2000 to 2002, beginning when plaintiff was 16, plaintiff was the victim of sex trafficking and abuse by convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Plaintiff was lent out by Epstein to other powerful men for sexual purposes. One such powerful man was the defendant, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince Andrew was a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite who spent years overseeing and managing Epstein's sex trafficking network. According to Prince Andrew, he met Epstein through Maxwell in 1999. Prince Andrew thereafter became a frequent guest in Epstein's various homes around the world, including New York City, where he sexually abused plaintiff at Epstein and Maxwell's invitation when she was a minor, when she was 17 years old. Although the alleged incidents took place nearly 20 years ago, the lawsuit was brought under the Child Victims Act, a 2019 New York state law that permits alleged victims to make claims relating to their childhood, regardless of how long ago they occurred. The lawsuit goes on to explain why Giuffre didn't come forward sooner. As part of their sex trafficking efforts, Epstein and Maxwell intimidated plaintiff into remaining silent about what happened. It also argues that the court in New York has jurisdiction over defendant, as defendant sexually abused plaintiff in this state. The lawsuit describes how Maxwell and Epstein first trapped and then trafficked her. Giuffre became a victim after Maxwell recruited her, when plaintiff was working at the Mar-a-Lago Club in Palm Beach, Florida. Epstein also flew plaintiff on his private plane nationally and internationally numerous times when she was under the age of 18. According to available flight logs, Prince Andrew began flying with Epstein on his private plane as early as 1999, when he flew with Epstein and Maxwell to Epstein's private island, Little St. James, and from other locations including West Palm Beach, Florida, and Teterboro, New Jersey. The prince has confirmed he flew on the plane and visited Epstein's homes. The lawsuit continues to tie her alleged abusers together. In 2000, Epstein and Maxwell attended Prince Andrew's 40th birthday. That same year, Prince Andrew threw Maxwell a birthday party in Sandringham. Epstein was among the guests. In 2006, Prince Andrew invited Epstein to his daughter's 18th birthday party, despite Epstein being charged with procuring a minor for prostitution only 1 month prior. The lawsuit goes on to allege that on one occasion in 2001, at Maxwell's home in London, the three of them forced her to have sex with Prince Andrew against her will, and the below photograph allegedly depicts them prior to the abuse. The suit also alleges that Prince Andrew sexually abused her on 2 other occasions, on Epstein's private island and in his New York mansion. During each of the aforementioned incidents, it says, Prince Andrew knew Giuffre was a sex trafficking victim and that she did not consent to engaging in sexual acts with him, and that he knew her age based on communications from Epstein and Maxwell. It goes on to criticize the prince's friendship with Epstein. In 2008, Epstein pled guilty in Florida to the charge of procuring a minor for prostitution. In 2010, after Epstein had served his sentence and registered as a sex offender, Prince Andrew was photographed with Epstein in Central Park and stayed at Epstein's New York City mansion. In early 2015, after plaintiff had publicly accused Prince Andrew of sexually abusing her, Prince Andrew emailed Maxwell stating, "Let me know when we can talk. Got some specific questions to ask you about Virginia Roberts." Roberts was Giuffre's maiden name, and this part of the lawsuit is referring to a leaked email revealed by the BBC in December 2019. The lawsuit goes on. On July 2nd, 2019, the US Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York charged Epstein with sex trafficking. He was arrested on July the 8th and found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center on August the 10th. The lawsuit goes on to explain that after Epstein's death, the media started to look more closely at Epstein's friends, and in November 2019, in response to this renewed scrutiny, Prince Andrew sat for an interview with BBC Newsnight, stating he did not regret his friendship with Epstein and that he had no recollection of meeting Giuffre. Prince Andrew publicly pledged to assist the US authorities with their criminal investigation of Epstein. The lawsuit then shares a link to his statement where he says, "Of course, I am willing to help any appropriate law enforcement agency with their investigations if required." Despite this public pledge, Prince Andrew has refused to cooperate with US authorities. Former SDNY US Attorney General Jeffrey Berman stated that Prince Andrew had provided zero cooperation, despite US prosecutors and the FBI contacting his counsel. The lawsuit concludes that in this country, no person, whether president or prince, is above the law. So what does Giuffre want out of this lawsuit? Well, on the final page, it says she wants a judgment against the defendant, awarding compensatory and punitive damages in an amount to be determined at trial. Plaintiff hereby demands a trial by jury on all causes of action asserted within this pleading. And that would be an incredible sight, the ninth in line to the throne on trial. But of course, before anything can happen, they'll need to serve notice on Prince Andrew, and so far that's been tricky. Giuffre's legal team's London office sent the papers at his address at Royal Lodge, Windsor, on September the 9th, and took this photo of the envelope with the Queen's image on the stamp. A policeman on duty took the envelope, but Prince Andrew was in Scotland at the time. Then, more recently, Giuffre's lawyers sent the notice to Prince Andrew's legal team in Los Angeles, both by email and by FedEx. Now, earlier, we spoke with a very prominent British lawyer, Mark Stevens, who represented James Hewitt when allegations of his affair with Diana, Princess of Wales, first emerged. This is what he had to say about Prince Andrew's position regarding the legal documents that were served.
Prince Andrew has now been officially served, and of course, that means that the process begins. But of course, service is just the first step along the road. So the next thing is for the court to determine whether or not it has jurisdiction over him. And that's a much more difficult legal point for the lawyers for Virginia Giuffre.
Of course, Prince Andrew has always denied Virginia Giuffre's allegations, and if this does go to trial, one could expect him to reiterate the account he's given so far. In the BBC interview back in November 2019, he said, "I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady." He also tried to raise doubts about the photograph, saying, "I have no recollection of that photograph ever being taken. I don't remember ever going upstairs in the house because that photograph was taken upstairs. Also, I think from the investigations we've done, you can't prove whether that photograph is faked or not because it is a photograph of a photograph of a photograph." He also disputed her account by claiming he and Giuffre were in different locations during one of the alleged incidents. On the day that she says this occurred, they already left to go to the island, so it could not have happened. Now, just a final note before we bring in our guest, a quick look at the lawyers. The lawyer acting for Virginia Giuffre is 80-year-old David Boies, who has acted for Harvey Weinstein and on behalf of tobacco companies, including Philip Morris. Prince Andrew's American legal team is led by Andrew Brettler, and there has been speculation in the press over the past week or so that Prince Andrew was considering firing the firm, but at the time of recording, that has not happened. Well, let's bring in our guest now. And in New York, we have Alan Dershowitz, retired Harvard law professor who represented Jeffrey Epstein many years ago. In Los Angeles, we have Lisa Bloom, a lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein's victims and who also represents a witness against Prince Andrew. And in London, we have Russell Myers, the royal editor for the Daily Mirror, who's been in contact with Prince Andrew's inner circle. Russell, I'd like to start with you. Given the breaking news that Prince Andrew is widely considered now to have been officially served, what has been the reaction?
Well, it's been a feverish activity over the last few days. Certainly, the people that I've been speaking to in Prince Andrew's inner circle, in his camp, were desperately trying to get him to change tact from the wall of silence that he'd been putting up in recent weeks and months. I think that it was widely accepted by his friends and closest confidants that he wasn't getting anywhere with that kind of defence, and certainly it was widely considered to be failing him. Certainly the UK legal team that he had put in place had chosen not to say anything, not to produce any comment to this latest civil case by Virginia Giuffre, and I think that has been widely admonished. But now, obviously, Prince Andrew is in a very, very difficult situation now, where he's the clock is counting. These papers have been served, and it seems as though the US team will completely take over his strategy from now on.
Wow! And there are reports that he's going to come out fighting. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I think, from the people I've spoken to, were saying that he'd been very stressed and very worried in recent weeks. And I think that the pressure had been certainly building from a point of his legal team saying that don't worry about this case, it will be all done and dusted before you know it, going into a courtroom saying that they didn't think there was any legal basis for the case, and the judge essentially throwing that argument right back at them. One may wonder if he will come out fighting now, because he hasn't said anything for so long, and he's already said that he would cooperate with any law enforcement agencies and give closure to the victims of sexual abuse. So if he is true to his words, then he should be standing by it right about now.
OK. We heard from Mark Stevens that he does enjoy some sovereign immunity, and it won't be for the Queen to strip him of that, or waive that, if you like. But for Boris Johnson, can you foresee circumstances where Boris Johnson will do that?
Well, I think that would be absolutely cataclysmic for Boris Johnson to wade in like that. No doubt, as I just said, Prince Andrew has said himself that he would cooperate with any investigation. I mean, he was talking on a legal standpoint then, but seeing as this civil case has been brought by one of Jeffrey Epstein's sex victims, that I think he is duty bound to face this head on now. And again, I think that the US team who were brought in at the 11th hour to deal with this have been absolutely dismayed with the level of cooperation from Prince Andrew's UK team.
A quick question on his American team. There are reports that he's very dissatisfied with them and was considering firing them.
Well, absolutely, that was my complete understanding. But they're backed into a corner now, because they've had to pull up their socks and get on with it. And he hasn't had time to find a new team. The clock is counting. He's got 21 days from these papers being served now.
Well, let's move. Yes, that's right. 21 days. OK, let's move to the lawyers now. Professor Dershowitz, if I may start with you. Do you consider him officially served? And what is the significance of the court of the Southern District of New York taking this on? Does that mean that it had to pass a certain threshold of credibility?
No, not at all. If he's innocent, he should be fighting back. I'm innocent. I fought back. She dropped her claim against me that she had sex with me. Her own lawyer has now admitted that she was clearly wrong, simply wrong. Her other lawyer has said on television that his investigation showed that she did not have sex with any prominent people, and that she essentially committed perjury when she said she had sex with Leslie Wexner. She is a very, very, very poor witness, and the prince ought to take her on directly if he's innocent. And if he's innocent, he ought to be fighting back. He ought to be asserting his innocence in court. He ought to be challenging her credibility. He ought to be doing exactly what I did successfully to get the charge dropped.
We'll take a look at that in a moment. Lisa, I want to bring you in now. I couldn't help but notice you recoiling at some of what Professor Dershowitz had to say there.
Let's be honest about what has happened in the case so far. Prince Andrew has lost the first round. He contested service. He said, I wasn't properly served. He tried to duck and hide from the case. That did not go well for him. Now he has been properly served. And apparently the people around him are getting blamed for the strategy. He's the guy at the top. He's the royal. He's the defendant. He's the one who ultimately calls the shots. That's what he chose to do in the first round. Now he has to respond. He has no choice. So, of course, he says he's going to come out fighting. I sue people like Jeffrey Epstein and high-profile people every day. That's what they always say. We will see how the case proceeds.
Can I ask you about the strength of the lawsuit? What does it mean when the most important court potentially in the United States takes on the case? Does that give the lawsuit any credibility whatsoever, or is it just saying we're going to hear it?
Well, she has sued in federal court. You're right, in the SDNY, the Southern District of New York. I guess that could be considered one of the most important courts. But to be fair, anybody can file a lawsuit. It then proceeds. So we haven't had a motion to dismiss yet, which might be something he would do. That hasn't been determined yet. What has happened so far is she has filed the case. He has now been served. He has to respond. Discovery will then begin, where depositions get taken, documents get subpoenaed, and we'll see.
I think at this point he has no choice but to fight back. Lisa's brilliant mother, who is one of the great lawyers in America, Gloria Allred, has commended me for fighting back when I asserted my innocence, and I wrote a book. I challenged her. I deposed her. I went to the mat, and ultimately the lawyers saw the light and withdrew the charge that she had sex with me. I never met her. I never saw her. I never heard of her. And I think if you're innocent, you must fight back. The last thing you want to do if you're innocent is seal material. You want to get everything out there, and that's what the prince should be doing if he's innocent. He should act like an innocent person, not try to hide. I think now he has no choice. He has to fight back.
Come in, Lisa. Come in, Lisa.
But yes, but this case is very different because we know that he did meet her because there is that infamous photo of the two of them together. So we're here to talk about Prince Andrew today, and he has said publicly, I never met her. And yet there he is with a photo of her when she was 17 years old with his arm around her and Elaine in the background.
Just a broader point then on the lawsuit, 15 pages, that photograph apparently very telling. But apart from that one photograph, what evidence is there? Isn't it just his word against hers?
You know, we say, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? That photograph is very telling. I suppose. Sure, but
we've all got photographs with hundreds of people. I mean, what I'm saying is,
but that shows that they were together.
It shows they were together. Maybe he doesn't remember it. He meets hundreds, maybe thousands of people. The question I'm asking you is, how does she convince anybody when it's just her word against his? As far as I can tell from the lawsuit, there are no witnesses and there's no actual video or anything else.
Okay, well, if I may respond to that, because
let Lisa finish.
This is a very important point. A woman's testimony is evidence in a court of law. People say, well, other than her testimony is very important. Ghislaine Maxwell is standing next to her in the photo. Ghislaine Maxwell is still alive in New York, incarcerated, and she could be subpoenaed. We don't know what witnesses and evidence exist yet because the lawsuit has only just begun. So I would not discount it as, well, it's just her testimony. I have many cases where it's my client's testimony against that of the defendant, and that is sufficient. That can be sufficient to win a case.
I know what the evidence is. I know what the evidence is. The evidence is, yes, she says she had sex with Prince Andrew. She also says that she met Al Gore and Tipper Gore. Now everybody's admitted that was a lie. She also claimed she had sex with Leslie Wexner. Her own lawyer on television said Leslie Wexner never had sex with her. She claimed she had sex with George Mitchell, Ehud Barak, and many prominent people. Her own lawyer has said she had sex with no prominent people. So that's the evidence. The evidence is not her word against his. It's her word coupled with a long history of lying about prominent people against his. And
okay, you've made your point. You've made your point, Professor Dershowitz. Lisa, I have to move on. A lot of people will be wondering why this is a civil action and not progressed into a criminal action.
Because the criminal authorities have not prosecuted him, and it's a great disappointment. You know, we just had hearings here in the U.S. by prominent gymnasts like Simone Biles about how the FBI let them down when they reported a predator. I see this in my practice every day. My clients often go to the police, and the police do nothing, so they come to me. We bring a civil case for money damages. It is the second best thing. In a civil case, you can control the case.
I know why hasn't prosecuted. Remember that when the government indicted Ghislaine Maxwell, they didn't use Giuffre's testimony. They indicted him for something that happened before Epstein met Giuffre and after she left. The same thing is true with Epstein. When he was indicted, the government made a deliberate decision not to use Giuffre's testimony because they know she is not a credible witness. They know she is a long-term liar, and the government doesn't rely on her. That's why the government is not criminally prosecuting the prince. That's why the government didn't criminally prosecute me. I invited them to.
Is that the case, Lisa, that the threshold, Lisa, is that the case that the threshold for evidence in a criminal prosecution is much higher?
It is higher, but Mr. Dershowitz, with all due respect, is making a lot of assumptions. Something didn't happen, but we don't know exactly why. I would like to add that I represent a witness who has come out publicly who said that she saw Prince Andrew and Virginia together in a London nightclub in the early 2000s. We have given her testimony to the FBI, and she's also available to testify in the civil case, which is another important piece of evidence because, again, Prince Andrew didn't say, I don't remember if I ever met her or not. He said very clearly on television, I never met her.
No, actually, he said, I have no recollection of meeting her. So that's, I guess that's the way he wants to phrase it. Lisa, I need to ask you something. What is in the lawsuit, on the back page, you see that she says she's looking for punitive damages and also a trial by jury. What is the significance of those two things?
So punitive damages are damages to punish somebody for very bad behavior, for malicious or oppressive behavior. I won a trial recently, and we got very significant punitive damages of about $8 million. If a jury finds that he did have sex with her when she was underage, I think it's highly likely she will get punitive damages.
Professor Dershowitz.
She's already made over $5 million for bringing these lawsuits. Now, I want to talk for a minute about Lisa's witness. Lisa's a great lawyer and a very accomplished lawyer. But her witness claims that she danced with the prince at a nightclub. The prince is one of the most recognized faces in the world, and yet there were no reports, no media reports, no gossip reports, nothing in the mail, nothing about the prince dancing with an underage girl at a nightclub when it happened. That's very, very...
Professor Dershowitz, to be fair, in a dark nightclub, reporters aren't necessarily going to know that she's underage, are they? But apparently, according to her...
He's dancing with a woman, and that would warrant a report. Look, and there was no report.
There were a lot of reports about him going to nightclubs during that time period. He was known as Randy Andy.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on from the tittle-tattle. Professor Dershowitz, we're running out of time. A final question for you, and then I must get over to Russell Myers if possible. There's another preliminary hearing coming up in October. Can you see, because he's been served, it's a long road to do a trial, can you see Prince Andrew on trial in New York?
I think it's likely that the case will be dismissed based on a release that was given by Giuffre in exchange for a large amount of money, saying that she wouldn't not only sue Jeffrey Epstein, but she wouldn't sue a large category of other people. I'm not free to tell you what's in that release. We made a motion to get the release sealed, but Giuffre said no, she didn't want the release sealed. She's trying to hide everything. She tried to hide her emails. She tried to hide her book manuscript. She's now trying to hide the release. If she's telling the truth, why is she hiding all the facts? So Lisa, I think there's a good chance that it will be dismissed once this release is made.
Lisa, do you see this going to trial or dismissed?
I see it going to trial. I think she's ready to fight all of the way, and all of these technical arguments will be brushed aside.
Russell Myers, final question for you. Russell Myers, final question for you. This is said to be the Queen's favourite son. He's 9th in line to the throne. What is this doing? What is this story doing to the reputation, the standing of the monarchy in Britain?
Well, undoubtedly, Andrew's reputation is in the gutter, and I think the feeling from people close to him, and certainly within the royal family, is that they're very distressed and wondering where this is all taking the reputation of the royal family as well. And they are privately imploring him to get this business done one way or the other. So the ball is very much in his court, and it remains to be seen how his lawyers are going to act upon it now.
Russell Myers, Lisa, and also Professor Dershowitz, thank you all for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.